finishing talking about soils, I will just have 2 videos to post instead of 1, or maybe I can merge them together. I don't know. But soils. There's pretty much an infinite variety of soils. So you're never going to be expected to know names of different types of soils, but you should be able to talk about the different components. You should, in general, know the difference. I'm going to move this so that you can see the figure. This figure shows just the relative size of sand, silt, and clay. So sand is generally really large, silt is in between, clay is very small. So something we will talk about when we're talking about soil texture, we're going to do a soil texture lab or look at porosity. Porosity is a measurement of how much air, or how many pores are in the soil. And the amount of air pockets there are affects how quickly water can pass through it. So porosity is looking at how quickly water can pass through it. This little chart here, this figure, you should be able to read a chart like this. So if you're told that you have like 30% clay in the soil, you'd be about here, and 50% silt, and let's say 50% sand. So 50% silt would come down from about here, 50% sand would come up from here, and then 30% lands you in loam. Okay, it's not a difficult chart to read as long as you know how to figure it out. But we'll look at these at least one day later next week. That's the kind of chart you should be able to read. But since these are the 3 components of soil, this is an easy graph to compare different soils to each other. Okay, so you want to be able to read the type of graph that's there. You should know what determines soil texture. So texture is primarily looking at the ratios between clay and sand and silt. Okay, and then you should know in general what fauna and flora are. So I don't know if you know those terms from English class or from a few previous science class. What's fauna? Or what's flora? So this says healthy soil fauna can determine soil fertility. Fauna is animals. So when we're talking about soil, it's usually bugs. Fungus technically counts as fauna, even though it's not an animal. It's not a plant either, it's its own group. But fungi would be included in there. A lot of bacteria would be included in there. So the health of a soil can be dependent on what animals are present. And then flora is plant life. So fauna and flora are plants and animals in general. So these are all examples of stuff that you could find in a soil ecosystem. So lots and lots and lots of bugs, different types of protozoa, which again would be bacteria, some soil fungus. There's fungus growing on the tree. Okay, but again, these are all things that can help contribute to the health of soil. One of those particular ways that it can help contribute is mycorrhizal or mycorrhizae, but mycorrhizal symbiosis. And this is where fungus actually has a symbiotic relationship with plants. So the fungus gets nutrients from the plant, but it helps the plant absorb water and nutrients from the soil. So they help each other grow. You should know soil horizons. That's on the next page, but it's also talked about here. So there's the O horizon, there's the A and B horizon. So topsoil, you can buy bags of topsoil at the store if you want to grow potted plants or put in a flower bed, is richer in organic material. So that's usually what people want to buy if they want to grow something, because you need organic material to grow plants well. Subsoil is underneath that, and it doesn't usually have as much organic material. So when we're looking at soil horizons, this is an example of them. So there's the O layer, and that O stands for organic. There's topsoil, also called the A layer, and this is where there is a lot of organic matter, but there are also roots, and there's inorganic material around or involved. The E layer is the alluviated layer. Alluviated means washed out. You don't have to know what the different letters stand for. but you should be kind of familiar with what would be in each layer. So O is your top layer. We've got decaying organic matter. If you are planting stuff, you've removed the organic layer, or the O layer, because you don't have dead decaying things in your garden, probably. So you've removed that layer. But hopefully you have a topsoil layer, because that's where your plants that you're growing will get the nutrients from. So O layer, A layer, E layer. B is subsoil. Some pictures or examples of the soil layers that look like this might have another layer underneath it. That's where you get to the bedrock. So this is where, if you dig deep enough, you should hit dirt that's never seen the light of day, soil that's never been exposed to air. It doesn't have any organic material in it. Eventually you'll hit bedrock as well, okay? So you should know the soil horizons. In general, from these horizons, from these layers, where's your food gonna come from? From the topsoil, from A layer. And you could have gotten that from one of two things. You could have, or three things. I said it. I mentioned when you plant the garden, you get rid of the O layer, but your food comes from the A layer. You can look at this and see that, or it says it right there. Okay, your food comes from the A horizon, the topsoil. Okay. Like I said, you don't need to know this whole list of stuff. Okay, so you can just ignore this table pretty much. But you should be able to name the components of soil. You should be able to talk about why organisms are helpful for soil. Looking at the next section. This is looking at how we use soil, how sometimes we abuse our use of it, and how we can conserve it. So one of the things that you'll want to know is what arable means. Anybody know what arable is? Farmable. If it's arable, then it can be farmed. And there are some lands that can't be farmed, like we can't farm in the Antarctic. We thought that the Cerrado was unarable, but it turns out we can actually farm there. You just have to modify the soil, okay? So you need to know what arable means. You need to know about why soil loss is a problem. So looking back at the soil horizons, if we're losing soil when we farm, then eventually the O layer is already gone and the A layer will be gone, so all you're left with is the E and the B layer. There's not a lot of organic material in the E layer, okay? So soil loss is a problem if you're trying to farm in the same area from one year to the next, because you're going to lose soil, you're going to lose ingredients that you need to grow stuff, so you're going to have to add stuff back to it, which is a problem, okay? There are 4 different types of erosion that you need to know. So there's sheet erosion. Well, there's water erosion first, and that there's a couple of different kinds of that. So there's sheet erosion, where water is just washing away a layer of soil. There's rill erosion, and that's where you go from rill erosion to gully erosion. So rills are really small, little, like rivers, essentially, that soil will get washed down because the rain carries soil away, and as that gets bigger and bigger, then you get gullies, okay? And then there's also wind erosion. So here's an example of what this looks like. There's sheet and rill erosion. Gully erosion is a little bit more aggressive or excessive. It's larger than rill erosion because a lot of rill erosion has happened to get to gullying. And then wind erosion and desertification is the process of productive farmable land being converted to desert. Wind erosion helps with that because wind can just blow soil that's light enough away. So sandy soil can be good to grow things in, but the wind will just blow the sand away. Okay. When we farm heavily, that causes soil to be eroded more quickly. So the Dust Bowl, you guys remember learning about that as a historical thing? The 1920s and the 1930s. That happened because of agricultural practices, largely. There were other factors involved, but the way that farmers planted their crops and took care of their land helped make the Dust Bowl the way that it was. So since that point, There are several things that farmers have been trying to do to help prevent erosion. We'll talk about that. But other things that can damage or cause problems with erosion are irrigation. Obviously, you have to have water to grow plants, but if you water the wrong way or you water too much, then you can make erosion worse. Okay. Depending on where you get your water from, that can be a problem when you're looking at irrigation. Also, it's not super efficient, irrigation as a system, and sometimes one area gets waterlogged where another area still needs water. So waterlogging can be a problem. Salinization. When you think saline, what do you think of? Salt, right? So a saline solution. People use saline solutions if they're congested. You spray that into your nose. You might use a saline solution for cleaning, like your contacts. That gets put in a really low concentration saline solution. But if you're watering from a source that has salt in it, then you can salinize or put too much salt into the soil, and that's a potential problem from irrigation. Arid is another word for being productive. So, wait, I'm saying that wrong. Arable is productive farmland. Arid would mean dry. So desertification can affect arid land soils. So again, why desertification is a problem. We're concerned about desertification because land that is farmed on a lot, or land that's used for cows to range on, or to be turned out to pasture to just graze on, is usually very dry. So it's subject to desertification. It's more likely to be turned into desert, so it will never be productive again. So you want to know problems with fertilizers and irrigation. So a problem with fertilizers, you can over-fertilize. Plants have to have nutrients, but you don't want to put too many nutrients in. And there's a whole science that goes into using fertilizers. We'll talk more about problems with fertilizers, but one of them is that when we do conventional farming, when we add fertilizer to soil, to get the fertilizer, we have to burn fossil fuels to make the fertilizer. And that is contributing to greenhouse gas emissions, which contributes to climate change. So that's an environmental impact of using fertilizers. When you use fertilizer and it washes off into a stream, fertilizer gets carried downstream to the ocean. That can cause algae blooms, and that's a huge problem because algae blooms kill everything that's alive in the water, because the algae just grow and take over and they use all the oxygen. So all the fish die, all the plants die, and that's a huge problem for ocean and marine ecosystems. Okay, almost done. I have to talk about conserving soils. So these are some things that farmers are doing, and you've probably seen things like this in a field and maybe not really have paid attention to it. But using contours and ground cover, we can reduce how much runoff there is. That includes both soil runoff, so erosion, and then just water surface runoff. If you can reduce how much or how quickly water leaves an area, then you can reduce erosion. Okay, so contouring is plowing around a hill or across the side of a hill rather than going straight up and over the hill. So rather than going straight up and over, you would go around where the hill is. Okay, ground cover. This would be planting different kinds of things along the edge of your field where water was likely to leave, so that it helps hold the water back and hold the water in. You may have seen that in a field that you've driven by recently. Terracing, there's a picture of that here, would look like this. Not very common in Indiana because Indiana is very flat, so we don't have to terrace very much. But this is very common in a lot of countries where all they have are hills and mountainsides to grow on, so they terrace so that they can still grow food. Okay. Another thing that you can use, so during the time of the Dust Bowl, farmers would plow at the beginning of the year and they plowed at the end of the year. So over the winter they left their soil just open and exposed in their farmlands. So a lot of farmers don't plow at the end of the year anymore, or they plow and plant a cover crop. So they plant a crop. These are examples of cover crops like rye, alfalfa, or clover. They grow quickly and they're short, but it can help hold the soil in place. It helps cover the ground so you don't lose soil. And also, if they just plow that under the next year, then they're putting organic material back into the soil. So it can help provide organic material for the soil. They might also at that point plow in manure so that they have even more nutrients in the soil. Okay, one other way to reduce erosion is to reduce tillage, and tillage is plowing. So if you don't till at all, if you don't plow at all, then you are just leaving the ground cover that was left from last year, and you're planting underneath that. So then the new plants, the new seeds that you plant will grow up among that. But then you don't lose any organic stuff. Okay, so that's